Kendrick sat alone in the cafeteria, earbuds in, when Tyson mocked him for claiming his dad was in special forces. No one believed him, but the truth would come. Kendrick Mays had always been the quiet kid, the one who could slip through a crowd without anyone noticing. The cafeteria was a chaotic mix of chatter, trays clattering, and the hum of tired teenage voices trying to make it through another school day. But Kendrick didn't mind. It was easier that way. He sat at his usual spot in the corner of the lunchroom, back to the wall, earbuds securely in place, listening to music loud enough to drown out everything else. His mind wandered, blocking out the chaos around him. He could just picture his dad out there somewhere, doing the hard work that Kendrick couldn't understand but respected deeply. He didn't talk about it much, but it was the one thing Kendrick clung to when the world felt too heavy. But today, it wasn't enough. The music couldn't shield him from what was coming. Kendrick had hoped for some peace, but peace never lasted long at Jefferson Middle School. The bell rang, signaling the start of lunch, and like clockwork, Tyson Green spotted him. "Hey, Kendrick!" Tyson's voice was loud and unmistakable, cutting through the sea of chatter. Kendrick kept his head down, pushing his food around on his tray. Tyson had a knack for getting attention, even when he didn't deserve it. Tyson wasn't one to let things go. "Heard you told Miss Ledbetter your dad's in special forces," he called out again, louder this time. "Is that true? Or are you just making stuff up to sound cool?" Kendrick's heart sank, but he didn't look up. He knew what was coming. He'd heard it all before. He stayed still, pretending to be completely absorbed in his food. Tyson didn't understand the first time, so he repeated himself, raising his voice for everyone around him to hear. The laughter started then. It wasn't just Tyson now. A few of his friends joined in. Kendrick kept his head low, willing the sting in his chest to go away. It was easier to be invisible, easier to let the words bounce off him. But today felt different. Today, the words cut deeper. "Man, you really think anyone's gonna believe you? Special forces? Come on, Kendrick, get real." Tyson sneered as he took a step closer, his words sharp and mocking. Kendrick's hands tightened around his fork, his grip nearly crushing it. He didn't speak. He wouldn't. He didn't have to explain himself to anyone. His dad had always said that real men didn't boast about what they did. They just did it. But the pressure in his chest was growing, like a balloon filling with air, ready to burst. Tyson moved closer, leaning over Kendrick's shoulder, still sneering. "My uncle's in the CIA, and he doesn't go around telling people like you do. You really think you're special?" Tyson's words echoed through Kendrick's mind as the laughter continued. It wasn't just Tyson now. The kids around him, all the kids who had nothing better to do than mock someone, were starting to join in. The snickers and whispers came in waves, rolling through the cafeteria like a wave that wouldn't stop crashing. Kendrick kept his gaze fixed on his tray, his heart racing. Every second of the taunts felt like a year. He tried to block it all out, to escape into the quiet space in his mind where he could feel safe. But it wasn't working. They wouldn't let it go. They never did. "You think you're so tough, huh?" Tyson jabbed. "Special forces, sure. I bet you're just making up stories because you don't have anything else going for you." Kendrick's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. His mind raced. How could he explain? His dad had always been distant, a man of few words. But Kendrick knew what he did mattered. It wasn't about being flashy or brash. It was about doing something important, something most people would never understand. He knew the truth, even if no one else did. But they didn't care. They just wanted to mock him, to tear him down in front of everyone. He wanted to run away, to disappear into the background where they couldn't hurt him. But Kendrick had learned long ago that running didn't help. Hiding didn't help. It just made them louder. The school officer, Deputy Rick Callahan, walked by and overheard the commotion. Kendrick didn't even look up. He already knew what was coming. Callahan wasn't the kind of officer who stopped kids from bullying. He just stood there, chewing gum, taking his time like he had better things to do. "What's going on here?" Callahan's voice was flat, uninterested. His eyes flicked over to Kendrick and then to Tyson, sizing up the situation as if it were some petty little joke. "Nothing. Just Kendrick talking about his Special Forces dad," Tyson said, laughing loudly. "He's a joke." The bell rang for lunch, and Kendrick walked into the cafeteria, feeling like all eyes were on him. He wasn't sure how to explain it. Maybe it was the change in his own attitude, or maybe it was the way people were looking at him now, but everything felt different. And then Tyson walked up to him. "Hey man," Tyson's voice was almost timid, which was the last thing Kendrick had expected. "About yesterday. I didn't mean, I didn't know. I thought you were just, you know, making stuff up." Kendrick glanced up from his tray, surprised. "What are you talking about?" he asked, playing it cool though his heart was racing. "I mean, about your dad," Tyson stammered, looking awkwardly around at the kids in the lunchroom. "I didn't know he, well, I didn't know he was, you know, who he is. I didn't know he was that important." Kendrick leaned back in his seat. He'd expected more taunts, more jokes. He wasn't sure if this new version of Tyson, soft-spoken, unsure, was something to be grateful for or suspicious of. "My dad's always been important to me," Kendrick replied, his voice steady. "I didn't need to tell anyone. I wasn't lying." Tyson shifted uncomfortably, the silence stretching out between them. Kendrick could feel the weight of everyone watching. He wasn't sure if they were expecting a fight or just some kind of awkward resolution. Tyson finally nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm sorry, Kendrick, for what I said," Tyson muttered, then turned and walked away, leaving Kendrick to stare after him, wondering what had just happened. The rest of the lunch period passed in a haze. Kendrick didn't pay much attention to his classmates, who now seemed to be giving him a wide berth. The usual teasing had stopped, and in its place was something strange. Respect, maybe? Or was it fear? He didn't know, and he didn't care. For the first time in a long while, Kendrick felt at peace with himself. The bell rang again, and as he gathered his things, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, Kendrick." He turned around to see Deputy Callahan, the same officer who had joined in on the ridicule yesterday. He looked nervous, his usual smirk replaced with a frown. "I just wanted to say, I didn't know. About your dad, I mean," Callahan said, his tone almost apologetic. "I was wrong to laugh. I should have believed you. I, well, I respect your dad. I shouldn't have done that." Kendrick felt a rush of conflicting emotions. He wanted to say something sharp, something that would show Callahan how much his words had hurt. But instead, Kendrick just nodded. "It's fine," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But next time, just listen. People don't always lie about stuff like that. Sometimes the truth doesn't come with a loud announcement." Callahan looked down, ashamed. "Yeah, you're right. I'll do better." With that, he walked away, leaving Kendrick to finish gathering his things. As the day went on, Kendrick began to notice something else. The whispers had stopped. The teasing had stopped. And though the day was far from perfect, Kendrick felt like the school was slowly starting to reckon with what had happened. He didn't need anyone's validation. He didn't need Tyson's apology or Callahan's regret. He had already proven who he was, and no matter how many jokes they made or how many times they doubted him, the truth had already spoken. Kendrick wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. He wasn't the one who was invisible. Now, he was the kid who had something real, something that no one could take away. And for the first time, Kendrick understood that silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. His father had taught him that without ever saying the words. Kendrick's mind raced as the school day wore on. It was only the middle of the week, but everything felt different. The whispering had slowed, the looks less frequent. He wasn't sure if it was because of his father's visit or because his classmates were finally processing what had happened. The mocking had stopped, but there was a weight in the air now, one that Kendrick could feel. After lunch, Kendrick made his way to his next class. He was used to being invisible, used to slipping in and out of places without anyone noticing. But today, it wasn't like that. Everywhere he went, people seemed to take notice. He couldn't tell if they were afraid of him or if they had finally understood what he'd been trying to say all along. Maybe both. As he walked into the classroom, the teacher, Mrs. Ledbetter, gave him a long look, one that was almost sympathetic. She hadn't spoken to him about the cafeteria incident, but Kendrick could see the understanding in her eyes. She wasn't the kind of teacher who would push him to explain himself. She let him sit quietly at his desk, and for that, Kendrick was grateful. Kendrick's heart beat faster. He couldn't explain what he was feeling. A rush of pride mixed with a deep, undeniable sense of guilt. He hadn't told the truth. He hadn't even tried to explain. But now, standing here, his father's presence spoke louder than any words he could have said. "Dad," Kendrick said quietly, his voice cracking as he finally spoke. He didn't know what else to say. Master Sergeant Dorian Mays nodded, giving his son a reassuring smile. "You ready to go, son?" Kendrick nodded, unable to find his voice. They didn't speak much as they walked to the black SUV parked at the curb. Kendrick climbed into the passenger seat, his thoughts still swirling. Why had his dad come today? How had he even known? As the car pulled away from the school, Kendrick glanced out the window, still processing the chaos that had just unfolded. His classmates, the teasing, the officer's dismissive words. Everything had felt so real. And now, it all felt like a blur. But as the car pulled further away from the school, Kendrick's mind went back to the kids who had mocked him. To Tyson, who had laughed and mocked him like a joke. To the officer who had joined in, brushing off Kendrick's truth like it was nothing. "You okay, Kendrick?" Dorian's voice broke through his thoughts. Kendrick looked over to see his dad's eyes on him in the rearview mirror, his tone soft, but firm. Dorian was always the one who had everything under control, but today, Kendrick could see the concern in his eyes. "I don't know," Kendrick muttered, his voice barely audible. "I thought they would believe me. I thought it would be enough to just tell the truth." But they laughed. Dorian didn't say anything for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. Kendrick couldn't tell if his dad was disappointed or if he just didn't know how to respond. But then, Dorian spoke again, his voice quiet and steady. "Son, sometimes the truth doesn't hit right away," he said. "Sometimes, people are so wrapped up in their own lives, in their own worlds, that they don't take the time to listen. But that doesn't make your truth any less real. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. Just keep walking your path. The people who matter will see you for who you are, not who they think you should be." Kendrick sat back in his seat, the weight of his dad's words settling over him. He didn't need anyone else to believe him. His dad's words, simple as they were, had more power than any mockery or laughter ever could. As they drove further away from the school, Kendrick couldn't help but think of Tyson and the others who had laughed at him. They wouldn't get it, not yet anyway. But when they saw the truth for themselves, when they realized who his father really was, everything would change. Kendrick didn't need to say anything more. He had already proven his worth. All that was left now was to wait for the truth to make its way around the school, and when it did, it would hit like a tidal wave. The next morning, Kendrick walked into Jefferson Middle School feeling like a different person. He wasn't sure exactly why. Maybe it was the way his dad had looked at him yesterday. Or maybe it was just the quiet certainty that came with knowing the truth. But as he stepped into the familiar hallways, there was something different about the air. It was a bit quieter today. He wasn't sure if it was because of his dad's unexpected appearance or because everyone was still buzzing from the day before. Either way, Kendrick couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The moment he entered the cafeteria, the whispers started. Normally, Kendrick would have walked to his seat without anyone paying him much attention, but today was different. Kids glanced at him as he walked by, some avoiding his gaze, others staring with a mix of curiosity and, was that respect? He wasn't sure, but he noticed. Tyson Green was already at the table, his usual loud and cocky demeanor gone. He looked up when Kendrick approached, but quickly looked away. It was as if he was trying to pretend like nothing had happened. He didn't say anything, didn't crack his usual joke. It was almost like he was scared? Kendrick couldn't quite place it. He sat down, his tray of food untouched. His stomach was in knots, but not from the usual anxiety. It was the weight of knowing things were about to shift. They wouldn't just forget what had happened. They couldn't. As the morning classes went on, Kendrick couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the moment when he'd seen his dad standing in the parking lot. The uniform, the way his dad had stood so still and powerful, like nothing could shake him. Kendrick had always admired that about his father, but now, standing in his dad's shadow, he felt something else. Pride, yes, but also a new understanding of what it meant to truly be seen. Callahan chuckled. "Special Forces, huh? Sure, kid," he said dismissively. "Maybe next time, don't try so hard to impress people." The officer walked away, clearly not caring about the ridicule Kendrick was facing. The laughter continued, growing louder. Kendrick sat there, frozen, as if his body had become numb. The jokes didn't stop. People were whispering about him in the halls. In gym class, someone called him Green Beret Jr. when he missed a shot. The comment wasn't even funny, but it didn't matter. It was just another thing to pile onto him, another mark on the list of reasons why Kendrick had learned to keep his head down and stay quiet. By the time lunch ended, Kendrick felt like he was suffocating. He walked to his next class with his head down, earbuds back in place, but it didn't matter. The whispers were still there, floating in the air around him. The day passed slowly, each minute dragging as if the world were moving in slow motion. Kendrick couldn't concentrate on anything. His teachers were talking, but he couldn't hear them. All he could hear was the laughter, the words. He wanted to go home. He wanted to escape to the quiet of his room, where no one could make him feel small. But that wasn't going to happen. Not today. By the end of the day, the joke had spread throughout the entire school. Even some of the teachers knew about Kendrick's dad now, and most of them didn't believe him either. They just saw a kid who was lying to cover up whatever insecurity he had. They didn't see him for what he was, a kid trying to hold on to a piece of himself that nobody else understood. As Kendrick sat down in his last class of the day, his heart ached. He didn't care about being popular, but he did care about his dad. His dad had been everything to him, his hero, his guide, his constant. And now, Kendrick was left to carry the weight of the ridicule, alone. Kendrick's heart was heavy as he walked out of the last class. The day had dragged on, each minute stretching longer than the last. His mind was still caught in the cafeteria, the laughter echoing in his ears like a relentless drumbeat. He hadn't wanted to be noticed, hadn't wanted to stand out, but now it felt like his whole life was under a microscope. As he walked through the hallways, the whispers continued. Some kids passed by, still snickering, while others made it obvious they were glancing at him. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, hoping they would just disappear. But the truth was, they wouldn't. Not today. When Kendrick reached the front office, something was different. His stomach twisted as he stepped in, eyes scanning the familiar room. Mrs. Castillo, the secretary, was behind the counter, her expression unreadable. She looked up as he walked in, but didn't immediately greet him. "Kendrick, you're being checked out," she said, her voice neutral. He blinked, confused. "Checked out? Why?" His mind raced, the list of possibilities flying through his head. His mom? No, she was at work. And his dad? Well, his dad wasn't supposed to be back for another few weeks. Maybe there had been a mistake. "Who's here to pick me up?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Castillo glanced at the office door before speaking again. "Your father is here, Kendrick. He's waiting outside." Kendrick froze. His father? How could that be? His dad had been deployed for the last several months, working overseas in some undisclosed location. He hadn't been due back for weeks. This was unexpected. Something wasn't right. "Are you sure it's my dad?" Kendrick asked, still standing in the doorway. His thoughts were racing. His father wasn't supposed to be home. Mrs. Castillo gave him a puzzled look. "Yes, I'm sure. Master Sergeant Dorian Mays. He's outside, waiting by the car." Kendrick's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe it. His dad was here. Now, the man he had quietly bragged about, the man who was his role model, was standing in front of the school, probably wondering why his son was so embarrassed about the truth. With a quick nod, Kendrick turned and walked toward the front door. The hallway stretched before him, feeling longer with every step. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he felt like he had no choice. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face, and there, by the curb, stood his dad, tall, strong, and dressed in full military gear. The moment Kendrick saw him, his nerves seemed to vanish. Dorian Mays had a presence that made the world feel still. Even though Kendrick had seen him like this 1,000 times in his mind, this time it was different. It was real. Dorian's eyes flicked to Kendrick as he approached. The quiet strength in his gaze said everything Kendrick needed to hear. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. As he packed up his things, Kendrick noticed Tyson again. This time, Tyson wasn't surrounded by his usual group of friends. He was alone, standing by the door, glancing at Kendrick with a look that Kendrick couldn't quite place. He could feel the old tension between them, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, there was a quiet understanding in the air, a kind of truce that neither of them had expected. Tyson finally cleared his throat and, in a low voice, said, "Hey man, I was wrong. About everything. I didn't mean to make it worse for you." Kendrick didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected an apology, not from Tyson at least. The teasing, the mocking, it had all felt so personal. But now, hearing Tyson's words, it was as if the weight had been lifted. For once, Kendrick didn't have to defend himself. "It's okay," Kendrick replied quietly, his voice calm. "People just don't always listen." Tyson gave a small nod, a look of realization crossing his face. He didn't speak anymore, and Kendrick didn't need him to. Sometimes, silence was the most powerful thing. Kendrick walked out of the classroom and down the hallway, his steps lighter than they had been in weeks. The afternoon sun filtered in through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. He felt different today, stronger somehow. When he reached his locker, he saw that a group of kids had gathered nearby. They weren't laughing. They weren't whispering about him. Instead, they were watching him with quiet curiosity. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting to see if Kendrick would change. But Kendrick didn't care anymore. The moment to prove himself was over. He had already done that. And though the kids still watched, he didn't feel small anymore. As he grabbed his books from the locker, he heard someone call his name. "Hey, Kendrick." He turned around to see Deputy Callahan again. The officer looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet, but this time there was no mockery in his voice. "Listen," Callahan said, looking Kendrick in the eye. "I wanted to apologize again for laughing. I know I messed up, and you didn't deserve that." Kendrick nodded. "It's fine," he said again, though his voice was a little stronger this time. "But just remember, not everything is what it seems. Sometimes people need to stop and listen." Callahan's eyes softened. "Yeah, you're right. I'll do better." And with that, he walked away, leaving Kendrick to process what had just happened. Callahan hadn't needed to apologize, not really. But the fact that he had acknowledged Kendrick's truth, felt like a small victory. As Kendrick made his way toward the exit, the door to the school swung open, and he spotted his father standing outside, waiting by the car. Master Sergeant Dorian Mays stood there in the same military uniform, still as powerful as ever. He wasn't here to pick Kendrick up this time. He was just there, watching over him from a distance. But Kendrick felt his presence like a steady anchor. The day had been long, and the world around him felt like it had shifted, like it had been turned upside down and righted again. He didn't need anyone's approval. He didn't need to convince anyone that his dad was who he said he was. The truth had spoken for itself, and Kendrick had learned that sometimes silence was the loudest statement of all. As he approached his dad, Kendrick felt a surge of gratitude. His dad had been everything Kendrick had always hoped for, even when the world didn't believe him. And now, standing beside him, Kendrick felt proud. Not because of the title his dad carried, but because of the man his father was. "Hey, Dad," Kendrick said as he reached the car. Dorian turned to face him, offering a quiet nod. "You good?" "Yeah," Kendrick said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm good." And as they drove home, Kendrick realized that sometimes the hardest thing was simply staying true to yourself when no one else believed you. But in the end, the truth would always find a way to surface. And for Kendrick, that truth was more than just the words he had spoken about his father. It was about who he was, quiet, strong, and resilient. No matter what others thought, Kendrick knew that was enough. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the way Kendrick had expected. There was a subtle shift in the way people treated him, like they were starting to see him differently. It wasn't just about his dad being in special forces anymore. It was about something deeper, the strength it took to endure the ridicule, to stand tall when no one else believed you. Kendrick still sat at the edge of the cafeteria, still kept to himself, but there was no more laughing, no more mocking. The kids who had once whispered about him now gave him space, some with respect, others with an unspoken understanding. The world, it seemed, had recalibrated. One morning, as Kendrick sat down for lunch, he noticed a few of the kids from the previous day looking his way, not with hostility, but with a different kind of curiosity. He hadn't said much in the past few days, but he didn't need to. His silence had done the talking. People had seen what they needed to see. Tyson Green, who had been the loudest in his mockery, was now sitting at a different table. He still looked at Kendrick from time to time, but this time there was no smile, no taunting words. He had learned, Kendrick realized. He had learned what it meant to be quiet, to be resilient, to stand your ground without saying a word. The most surprising moment came when Mrs. Ledbetter, his English teacher, called on him in class. Kendrick hadn't raised his hand and he hadn't spoken out. He had learned to stay quiet, to observe, to absorb. But Mrs. Ledbetter, who had always been kind but distant, seemed to see something in him now. "Kendrick, would you like to read the next passage?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't a request she had made before. In the past, Kendrick might have stayed quiet, waiting for someone else to speak up. But now, he stood, just like his dad had taught him, and without hesitation, he walked to the front of the class. As he read the passage aloud, something clicked. The words weren't just words anymore. They were his. The stories he read weren't someone else's. They were his too. The confidence he had lacked for so long began to fill the empty spaces inside him. When he finished, there was no applause, no recognition. But when he returned to his seat, he caught a glimpse of Mrs. Ledbetter's face, a small smile, one that showed approval, but more than that, understanding. She had been watching him, just like everyone else had been, but she had seen what mattered. That afternoon, as he walked through the halls, he noticed the difference in the way people looked at him. It wasn't fear anymore, and it wasn't pity. It was respect. Kendrick didn't need to prove anything. He had already done that. But what he realized now was that respect wasn't something anyone could take away. It was something you earned, slowly, by standing up for what you believed in, even when no one else would. When he reached the parking lot, his dad's black SUV was parked in its usual spot. Dorian Mays was standing by the car, waiting for him with that same quiet strength Kendrick had come to admire. His dad wasn't the kind of person to tell Kendrick what to do, to tell him how to feel. But as Kendrick approached, his dad's eyes told him everything. "You good?" Dorian asked, his voice calm but steady, just like it always was. "I'm good, Dad," Kendrick said, a smile tugging at his lips. And for the first time, Kendrick really felt like he was. He wasn't the boy who had been laughed at. He wasn't the kid with the big story that no one believed. He was Kendrick Mays. And the truth, no matter how long it took, had already found its place. As they drove home, the sun dipping low in the sky, Kendrick looked out the window. He thought about all the times he'd been ignored, overlooked, ridiculed. He thought about the strength it had taken to stay silent, to endure. And he thought about the lesson his dad had taught him without saying a word. Real strength wasn't in being loud or trying to impress others. It was in being steady, being true, and never letting anyone else define who you were. The truth had finally come, and with it, Kendrick had found his voice. Not through words, but through actions, through his presence. And in the end, that was all he needed.